Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Professor Jonathan Adler. I'm, among other things, the founding director of the Coleman P. Burke Center for Environmental Law, which is sponsoring today's event. The center was founded 6 years ago with a generous $10 million endowment gift from our late alumnus, Coleman Burke, who was a noted, among other things, a noted conservationist on the board of many significant environmental organizations, and someone that wanted to give back to his law school. Today, it's a pleasure to welcome back to the law school former Representative Bob Inglis, who was last here. We figured out last night in 2014. Bob served in Congress from 1993 to 1999, and from 2005 to 2011 as a Republican from South Carolina. And since leaving Congress, has made it his mission to suggest the crazy idea that one can be a conservative Republican and care about climate change and care about environmental protection. And he founded an organization originally titled the Energy and Enterprise Initiative, but now titled Republic N, that's E-N as opposed to A-N for environment, and the video running in the back is from their website. As you will hear from Bob in a minute, he's passionate about these issues. He's passionate about the importance of dealing with issues like climate change, and is also someone that, at least traditionally, we would recognize as being on the right side of the American political spectrum. If I recall correctly, his lifetime American Conservative Union rating in Congress was 93.5, I believe, which is pretty good if one is trying to measure that. He was given the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award in 2015. He appears in the films Merchants of Doubt and Showtime's Years of Living Dangerously. He's been a fellow at Harvard, Harvard's Institute of Politics, and a visiting fellow at Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment, among other things. Grew up in South Carolina, still lives there with his wife on a farm, but thankfully we were able to drag him up to Ohio to enjoy our nice warm spring weather to talk about whether free enterprise can help us address climate change. So without any further ado, Bob.
Wow, thank you, Jonathan. It's nerve-wracking to be in a moot courtroom, I gotta tell you. In law school, I always found there was something, the little extra that I really didn't need in the schedule. I think it was second year was moot court, right? It's like the thing that if just didn't have that, I could handle all this. But it's like there's always something extra. Moot court was that. Nerve-wracking. Anyway, so for all of you that are experiencing that, well, this too will pass. And it's a little bit awkward to be here. I mean, Jonathan just mentioned this 2014 because I thought we'd be finished with this by now. And I just when you think about it, gee, that's 11 years ago. We really should have been finished with this whole thing by now. So, but let me, Jonathan gave you a little bit about how I got to this, but I want to give some more of that. But before I do that, before I poison the sample, I just want to hear from you for a minute about, well, let's see, first of all, show of hands. Who thinks we should try to solve climate change? You think we should try to solve climate change? Who's really not sure whether we should? Well, I'm going to ask a question whether we should or whether we can. Okay, so you think we should try to? You think we should? If you think you should, raise your hand. If you think we can, raise your hand. If you think we can't, raise your hand. Interesting. Okay, so now I know who to avoid in the Q&A. Just kidding. No, I'm joking, really. Alcohol. Okay, so now another question. Tell me, what would you, if you first folks who want to try to do something about climate change, tell me what it'd be. Give me some ideas about what we could do. Yeah.
There's been some interesting reports on carbon capture machines that look pretty effective. So the question is, how can you advance the technology to make them more efficient?
Right. And how do you think we can advance that technology?
By putting money into research.
Okay, so money. There we go. That's one thing we can do. Money. Yeah. What's up?
Employ regenerative agriculture practices and reduce factory farming.
Gotcha. And how do we do that practically? Tell me what it takes. I think it's going to be the same answer right over here. But anyway.
Actually, I was thinking of government regulation and probably economics.
Great. Okay. Good. Okay. So what else? Yeah.
Reduce methane emissions.
Okay. How we do that?
Force everyone to become vegetarians or
Or vegetarians or
be executed.
execute. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit of harsh punishment, but yeah. Okay. So methane. But I'm looking for how. How do you reduce the methane? Well, you said make everybody be vegetarian.
You have to eliminate all of the animals that eat grass and chew cud and stuff like that.
So would you join your compatriot there on the road with saying regulation would be the answer to that?
Actually, I don't think it's possible. I was being a little bit tongue in cheek.
Okay.
I don't think we can control methane emissions in a meaningful way.
Okay. And there's something. Yes. What can we do?
Maybe replace coal plants with nuclear?
Yeah. Okay. How do we do that?
A lot of tech out there, small modular reactors, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. See, I'm keeping on coming back to the money over here. Okay. So we get two things on the. One is money and one is regulation. Okay. What else? What else can we do?
Reduce methane from fracking. Just regulation, capture it. Economically cheap and easy.
Okay. A regulatory solution. Yeah. That's okay. Yes. Back and back.
We need to electrify a lot of things because if they're electric, then they can run on renewable energy.
Yeah. And how do you do that?
Well, there's a lot of innovation that has to happen and incentives to encourage people to replace.
Incentives. Okay. There. Okay. So we're back to the money thing over there, and I'm keeping on going on money and regulation. I'm looking for one more. Can you tell? There's one more I'm looking for. And I'm not going to call on Jonathan because he knows what I'm looking for. Yeah, yes, right over here.
I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but education to change people's behavior around, what they're used to as far as food, energy, etc.
Yeah, interesting. So consumer behavior would be what you're after changing. Okay. What else? Yeah.
Litigation, lawsuits against polluters, or bringing things.
Oh, interesting. Because that's what I first heard from Jonathan about basically trespass actions, right? It's what.
Trespass, nuisance, I mean, there's a whole bunch of theories now.
Yeah, okay. So that's actually a fourth one that I don't talk about too much. See, so it's good to be here at Case Western where I heard that in 2014 and I should be talking about it more. So that's a fourth one. There's a third one I'm looking for. Somebody tell me what it is. Yeah.
Maybe awareness among the community. I think people maybe don't really understand. Maybe in our field we understand a little bit. But I think in other fields people don't really understand how serious this is maybe.
Yeah, interesting. So awareness, okay, good. What's that? There we go. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Victor. I was waiting for it. Okay, it's a carbon tax. Anybody for that? Okay, good. And now you can say, Inglis, I thought you were supposed to be a conservative, and you're here to talk about a tax. Yes, I am. But I'm going to talk about those other things too. The money, the regulation, and then tax, okay? And my friend in the back can help us with turning off the thing, because you're probably tired of looking over our people walking by, aren't you? But anyhow, but before I get to those three things, I've social science research, you gotta get your data before you poison the sample. So now I'm going to start poisoning the sample, and then we'll come back and talk about those three methods. So So the first thing I need to do, though, is explain how it could be that a conservative could be hepped up on climate and talking about pricing carbon dioxide through a carbon tax. So let me tell you how that happened. So I was in Congress for 6 years saying that climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. And inasmuch as I represented Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina in the US Congress, that was the end of the inquiry. Al's for it, I'm against it. Next question. Okay, that's pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was my first 6 years in Congress. In 1998, I made the mistake of deciding to run for the Senate after being 6 years in the US Congress. Note to self, do not challenge 32-year incumbent in 70% right track territory. In October of 1998, if you can believe it, 70% of Americans thought we were, generally speaking, on the right track in this country. The budget had been balanced thanks to one of your congressmen who later became your governor, John Kasich. I was on the budget committee with John, and we balanced the budget. Okay, it wasn't John and me. It was that the tech boom was going on, and this thing called the internet and the PC was throwing off so much revenue into the economy that we balanced the budget. But John and I claim credit for it, you know? So, so we didn't have 401ks, we had 802ks. They were on steroids in 1998. And so the people of South Carolina gave Ernest F. Fritz Hollings 6 more years in the U.S. Congress, so he ended up U.S. Senate, he ended up serving 38 years. So I returned to the practice of commercial real estate law in Greenville, South Carolina, for 6 years, and then had the opportunity to run again for the same seat in 2004. That's the year that our son, the eldest of our 5 kids, had just turned 18, so he was voting for the first time. And he came to me and said, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." His 4 sisters agreed, his mother agreed. That's a new constituency, you know. Very important to respond to those people. They can change the locks on the doors to your house, and so you really need to respond to those people. So that was step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis. By the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what, right? I mean, you know you can lose by 1 vote. It wasn't in his economic interest to vote against me. He just started college. He knew that we were literally mortgaging the farmette that we live on. You know, farmette, that's when you're not really a farmer, you just pretend to be farmers. So it's 27 acres, and we got 10 chickens and 3 horses and a great big garden. We pretend to be farmers. And so Robert knew we were mortgaging the farmette to run for Congress again. And so he's going to vote for me no matter what. I think what he's really saying was, "Dad, I love you, and you can be better than we were before. So how about make this English 2.0, the new and improved version?" That was step 1. Step 2 is going to Antarctica with the science committee, seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. We can go into that in the Q&A time if you want to. Then third step was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening, which seems improbable, right, on a godless science committee trip? Because we all know that all scientists are godless. Apparently not, because this Aussie climate scientist that I was snorkeling with was clearly worshiping God in what he was showing me at the Great Barrier Reef. You know, St. Francis of Assisi might have said, "Preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words." And so Scott Heron, this Aussie climate scientist, was doing just that. It was in his eyes, it was written all over his face, it was in his excitement about what he was showing me. I knew we shared a worldview before any words were spoken. So later, without the snorkels in our mouths, we had an opportunity to talk, and he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life to love God and love people. Rides his bike to work, does it without air conditioning as much as possible in Townsville, Australia, a pretty hot place. Hangs the family's clothes out of the line, all to constantly love people coming after us. I got right inspired. I want to be like Scott, who's now a very dear friend, loving God and loving people. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. Second note to self, do not introduce carbon tax in midst of Great Recession when you represent perhaps the reddest district of the reddest state of the nation. It will not go well. It didn't go well at all. After 12 years in Congress, I got 29% of the vote in a Republican runoff. The other guy got the other 71% of the vote. And so rather spectacular faceplant in politics. You know, you don't usually lose that badly unless you've been indicted or something. Actually, that used to be the case. Now, you get indicted, you might do fine. But back then, it was very passé. You know, if you get, in the previous times, if you got indicted, you were really done for. So I hadn't been indicted, but I was just on the wrong side of Tea Party orthodoxy. And it wasn't just climate. I'd done some other things that can't be forgiven by the Tea Party. Let's see, I voted for the Confessions Good for the Soul, so I voted for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. There's President Bush's rescue, George W. Bush's rescue of the banks. Tea Party people were telling me what we need is a good depression to clean things out. I told them, you know, my parents lived through the Great Depression. I never heard them put the adjective good in front of that word. People were literally hungry, you know, and so I voted against a troop surge in Iraq. That got me in some trouble. I knew that we could do it, and my friend George W. Bush, I thought that we was doing nation building in Iraq. Isn't it interesting? This is encouraging, actually. Political orthodoxies appear fixed, but they're pretty fluid. So back then, conservatives said to me, how dare you vote against our president, George W. Bush, about this troop surge? Donald Trump comes along, trashes the whole effort in Iraq about once a month. Same people cheering. So in a strange sort of way, it might be encouraging that orthodoxies flip around. I wrote an op-ed favoring gay marriage. That didn't go over very well. But the thing that got me in most trouble, the most endearing heresy, was just saying climate change is real. Let's do something about it. Because it appeared that I'd crossed the other side, that I was marching with the Democrats, you know. So a foundation came to me and said, you know, Inglis, you're an unusual zoo animal. Actual conservative. Jonathan just said 93. He gave me a 93.5. That's an A here, right? 93. And so 93 Americans Conservative Union rating, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action, the liberal group, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO, the labor union. I was really gunning for a 0. I don't know how I got a 23. So the foundation said, you know, actual conservative, will you speak and write for the proposition? And I said, well, as a zoo animal, if the cage is nice, it's been very nice. I've been over to Glidden Place and I've had dinner last night. So the cage is very nice. So that's what I've been doing ever since. Like I said at the outset, I thought we'd be finished by now. I told our early funders, it's economic dislocation, Great Recession. Once this is over, my fellow Republicans will be back to ourselves and we'll be acting on climate change. I did not anticipate a Trump victory in 2016, and I did not anticipate that coming again. So we are extending this time that we are trying to get this done. Okay, so that's how I got to this, and I hope it qualifies as somebody that, as Jonathan said, right of center. I had an interesting conversation this morning with Randy and Kendall about how to describe that. And maybe you can be thinking about that for the Q&A, so you can, in order to ask me a question, you got to give me a suggestion. No, you don't have to, but if you can give me a suggestion about how to describe it. If I ask you, are you a conservative? The brand might be so messed up right now about what that means that you might not be willing to raise your hand. Maybe it's free enterprise as opposed to planned systems. I don't know. Maybe it's something, but if you got an idea, I could really use it, okay, about how to describe it. Particularly in the last week, I'll tell you. Because this thing messing with the bond market and basically creating something of a crisis on Wall Street that apparently raised that D word yesterday. As I understand it, the president said he could take a recession, but he couldn't take a depression. I think that was in a Wall Street Journal article I read late last night. That's a scary situation to me. As I just said, my parents lived through the Great Depression, never put the word good in front of it. And so it's a topsy-turvy time right now that you can help me with, is figuring out how to say to people, we need you. If you are right of center, typically, in other words, you're looking for free enterprise solutions, we need you in this climate effort. That's our whole goal at republican.org, is to reach those folks. Okay, so that's how I got to this. We had three possibilities on the from the rows here. The first was money, and then there was a thought about incentivizing various things, like there's a nuclear incentive, and we need some money. Okay, so that's a solution that would work. It's basically a bunch of clean energy incentives. They were in the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, and there are ways to accomplish that. The Inflation Reduction Act is a little bit under pressure right now, but although I think some of those incentives will remain in place, would be my guess, because of the 20 some odd Republican House members who've signed a letter that Series organized to say, hey, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So money is one way to do it. Another way to do it is the regulation approach. And that's what about ag and about methane. And that would work. It's there, particularly on methane, because you're talking domestic fugitive emissions, probably, and also in ag, where we're talking serious money that the federal government spends on ag programs. You can make it so that you regulate and you use the money angle there. If you want this money, this is how you do it. So those things, so money and regulations are ways to accomplish this. Now that I've politely said nice things about them, can I diss both of them? Here's the problem. With the regulatory solution is you can't regulate Chinese emissions from here in America. And so it's a real problem, because the thing about climate change is global emissions anywhere are climate change everywhere. And so you got to get the whole world in on this thing. That's why it's such a devilish problem. And so if we regulate here and they don't regulate there, manufacturers may pick up and move from here to there. When they get there, they're going to emit more than they were emitting here, because we're way more energy efficient than China is. So it could be that you go downhill in solving climate change. Not by the methane, because you're capturing those fugitive emissions, and maybe not by the changing ag practices here, because you are accomplishing things, but you're not yet getting China in on it. And then the clean energy incentives, the money part, has a similar kind of thing going on, which is, most of those are tax incentives, they're tax credits. Production tax credit for wind, investment tax credit for solar. If I were still in Congress, I'd be voting for some of the things. Why not? Besides, what conservative has never met a tax credit they didn't like? I mean, it's a way to reduce taxes. As you know, because it's fun to talk in law schools, because you normally have to explain. How you can have exemptions, deductions, and credits, and so you all get that, and you know that I can just speed right on and say a credit is a very powerful thing. And most of these are tax credits. And so, but they only apply if you pay American taxes. If you're a foreign firm, what does it matter to you that the American tax code has tax credits in it? You haven't affected their economics yet. And so you got to get to their economics. And And so now politely dissing the money and the regulatory solution, even though those are going to accomplish things here in America. And we'll have cleaner air here. We won't have the Cuyahoga River on fire again. We'll have, we'll have nice things here. But we might not have solved climate change yet because we haven't gotten the world in on it. So you can tell that I'm big on the third one. And I should give Jonathan free time here at some point to say why the litigation approach would work as well. But probably hard to litigate against China, though. I think hard to get them get jurisdiction. But so this carbon tax, Inglis, you're nuts, man. I mean, how could you be a conservative talking about a carbon tax? Well, what if you pair it with a reduction in payroll taxes so that there's no growth of government, and so that you address the regressivity of a carbon tax? Because a carbon tax by itself is regressive. It hurts poor people. Because, you know, $30 per ton price in carbon dioxide at the mine, at the pipeline, results in a 30-cent per gallon increase in the price of gasoline here in Cleveland or in Greenville, South Carolina. $40 a ton is 40 cents. $100 a ton is about $1 as the price of gasoline goes up. Price of electricity goes up with a $30 per ton price at the mine, at the pipeline. Price of electricity goes up by $11 a month in the average home. So there's somebody that brought the food over for this lunch today, and it's maybe his or her second or third job at that restaurant. She's paying 6.2% FICA tax on that job today. It's her second or third job. The restaurant's paying the other 6.2. It's a 12.4% tax on that second or third job. Reduce that tax. Put it on the carbon tax. Let's say it's $30 a ton. The Congressional Budget Office says that tax swap means that the bottom 70% of Americans end up better off because they get a bigger paycheck and they can do things to avoid the carbon tax. Turn down the thermostat, put plastic on the windows in the winter, carpool, do things, and change your behavior. As somebody said, we're looking for a behavior change. We think that this price signal is the behavior change because it means, hey, I can do things to avoid this carbon tax. And the real kicker here, the thing that makes this so much better than the regulatory or the money solution, we think, the clean energy incentives, even though, like I say, I'd be voting for some of those things, is that this one goes worldwide through a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Because if we had the domestic price, then under existing WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, you can apply that carbon tax to imports from countries that don't have a similar carbon tax. And that makes the whole world come along. Here's why. China is importing a sheet of flat steel through the port of Seattle right now. Here it comes. They dumped a lot into the trash dump of the sky. They stole the technology. They manipulated their currency. Here it comes. It's coming right through the port of Seattle. I'm a little bit sore about that because we make cleaner steel down in the lower part of South Carolina at Nucor Steel, but here it comes, cheap steel. You might be sore about that here in Cleveland too. But anyhow, so here it comes. We apply our tax. China objects in the World Trade Organization. Can't do that impermissible tariff. Well, they got other tariff problems right now. That's the message of this week. But they object. We think they lose that case in the World Trade Organization based on precedents in the chemical industry that say you can have a content tax, basing the tax on the content of the stuff coming into your country. And this would be a carbon content tax. If we're right and it's upheld, China, 24 hours after losing the case, because they do reach consensus easily, it's only taking about 24 hours. Because, dictatorship is a very effective government. It's not a very fair government, not a very nice government, but it is doggone efficient. The reason is they would say, why do we just pay a carbon tax in Seattle that's now being sent to Washington when we could have collected that ourselves and the money would be in Beijing? and the sheet of flat steel would be coming through the port of Seattle with no adjustment. So 24 hours later, no international agreement, no bowing and scraping at the UN, no protracted negotiations. Just a bold move by the United States says, we're ready to act, and you're probably going to find it in your interest to do the same thing. And so they follow suit, and tax carbon dioxide, and the whole world follows, because you're doing business everywhere in the world, you're doing business with America and China. And so then you've got 8 billion people seeing what the guy or gal who brought this food to you today is going to see tonight when they go to the Walmart to get plates for a bridal shower that they have tonight. They go to the store, and they're supposed to bring the plates. And so they see their paper plates and their plastic plates. Well, the plastic's a little bit more expensive today, right, than the paper. But go back after we do the carbon tax later this afternoon. And now it's implemented. And now what do you see? Well, the paper's going up, paper plates going up in price a little bit, right? Because there's chainsaw gas. There's some natural gas at the paper plant to dry the paper roll. It's up in price. Now you got a bigger paycheck in your pocket, right? She or he has a bigger paycheck because we reduced the payroll tax. They're looking at the paper plates, but the plastic plates, wow, have they gone up? They're all petroleum, all natural gas all the time. And so now, standing there in the Walmart, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, we're at republican.org. We love our libertarian friends, and we say, yeah, the liberty of enlightened self-interest. We don't want to tell her she can't have plastic. If she just loves plastic, you know that feature of plastic plates, when you tip the plate down, the food goes splat on the floor. If she just really likes that slippery thing about plastic plates, go for it, lady. Get the plastic. Just pay the true cost of it. But if she's cheap like me, she's probably going to pick up the paper plates. And that's going to happen on every shelf in the Walmart store. Because there could be some competitor that's cleaner and greener and cheaper now that dirty's been made accountable. And so it's all we talk about Republican. And let me now not bring to culmination here and open up your questions and comments by ending my frustration of all the economists in the room, because all we talk about is internalizing negative externalities. That's all we talk about at republican.org. And we think that it will unleash creativity and productivity if you could just show the true cost of the burning of fossil fuels. And Randy from University of Chicago, we were talking about our friend, we know to bow at the mention of Milton Friedman's name. You know, we're actual conservatives at republican.org. And you know, Dr. Friedman used to go on the Phil Donahue show. Anybody here old enough to remember who Phil Donahue was? Okay, so let me explain for everybody who doesn't know. Phil Donahue is basically a white guy doing an Oprah Winfrey show and from Chicago. So he used to have Dr. Friedman on, they'd spar. What do you do about pollution then, Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it? Friedman says, you tax it. You tax pollution. And then he goes on to explain that you can't let two people do on their person or property something that affects a third party. He explains that in economic terms. You can't allow that to happen. It's a market distortion. You can also make a moral case for that. In a biblical law, you can't do that. I can't do on my property something that harms you or your person or property. That became English common law, adopted as American common law. You can still sue me. Now we're on to the fourth one. You can sue me in trespass for that tort, right? So that's all we talk about is internalizing negative externalities. Our ad guy tells me every time I say those words, he says, what are you talking about? I don't even know what you're saying. And so usually I have to say, not to a class of law students, I usually have to say, accountability for the side effects of burning fossil fuels. Side effects works as well as internalizing negative externalities. But let me stop there, and having described sort of the three approaches that we see to solving the challenge of climate change, telling you how I got to this, let me hear your questions and comments, suggestions too about how to deal with this moment. I'm very interested. Yes, sir.
If the carbon tax like works so well, like why hasn't it happened yet? Oh, sorry.
Why
If the
am
carbon
I-
tax works so well, like why hasn't it happened yet?
Yeah, the politics are hard, aren't they? It's, you know, and I may be a dreamer. I'm not the only one, though. There's a song about that. But I remember in that financial crisis that was part of my being propelled out of Congress, somebody said, it's amazing how the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. You know, Secretary Paulson came and asked for $800 billion on like a page and a half of notes. And he got down on his knees with Nancy Pelosi and he said, please, I need this, $800 billion. And remember, it failed the first time on the House floor, and then we came back after the weekend and it passed. The market had dropped 800 points as we were turning it down. I was voting for it. My neighbor was voting against it. He went home for the weekend and heard from Duke Energy that they couldn't sell their bonds on Friday. He came back and he voted for it. It lost him the governor's race the next year. But by the way, all the $800 billion was paid back, every dime of it. Just saying. I'm over it, you know, but it was all paid back. But anyway, so the politics are hard, right? I mean, we've been in a difficult time. You would have thought that once recovery came, we would be back to ourselves, and the impossible would go to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. But I think that's still going to happen. It's just that we're gonna look at these other things. We're gonna do the money thing. We're gonna do the regulation thing. But we're gonna keep on realizing that, geez, this isn't getting the whole world. We think what we've got to do is get to conservatives and let them to hear it in their own language. Dan Kahan at Yale has a joint appointment in law and psychology, and he's a brilliant fellow. His research, he says, shows there are two personality types. Okay, Dan, that's a little bit simplistic if there are only two personality types, but anyway, he says you can have hierarchical individualists. Those are conservatives. They believe in working through a chain of command, so they're hierarchical, and they're individualists. They believe in individual effort and reward. And then they're communitarian egalitarians, left of center people. He says these are people who believe in community, they focus on fairness. And so they're communitarian egalitarians. The climate conversation has been conducted in the language of the left, communitarian egalitarian language. And so what people like us live to do is to change the language into hierarchical individualist language and reach people in that language. And so that's what it's going to take, we think, in order to we've got to get to folks with the right language so they can hear it. Yeah.
So kind of bouncing off of that, how would like more bipartisanship and changing that language kind of influence the like conservative right, especially when people like Donald Trump don't even believe in climate change?
And I think he said this week that he repeated the line about making more oceanfront property or something, sea level rise would. I think there's some Floridians that are going to find that not very funny as they continue to get these insurance bills, homeowners insurance bills that go up and up, or insurers leave the state. And it goes into the state plan that is going to get very expensive to the state of Florida. I think it's not going to be a really funny line if you're in Naples, Florida, at 3 feet above sea level, for example. So I guess my answer to your question is it's got to burn out. And I think we started that this week. That's my guess, is it started to burn out. Because with the market dropping like it dropped, and the D word being thrown around, and we're sort of thinking about Smoot-Hawley. I think there's some Wall Street types that got the message this week, so I think that we can't get everybody right. I can't expect that I'm going to get everybody that's voted for Donald Trump to come our way, but I can get the reluctant Trump voter, I think, and that's who we're after. I don't think I can get the folks that are true MAGA folks, because they're probably, I don't know what's going to take to reach them, but we can reach enough, we hope. Yes?
So why?
Why don't you believe that a merging of both approaches would work, the individualist and the communitarian? I don't think that they're exclusive. I think that maybe one would work on a smaller scale, one would work as you scale up. I'm not sure, but have you thought about that? Because I think a lot of center-left folks would agree with what you're saying, but I'm not sure about the, throwing out their approach too, as opposed to kind of integrating it with your own.
Yeah, well, you're of course right that there are, the country needs and wants both communitarian egalitarians and hierarchical individualists. It's sort of like we could wish for every child 2 parents. One who's a communitarian egalitarian, Johnny, we love you no matter what. And the other, a hierarchical individualist, Johnny, let's talk about your scores in math, right? The kid could benefit from both of those influences. And the country can have benefit from both. And so I'll tell you something, I'll disclose it here. It's, I don't start with this everywhere, but if my third solution, that carbon tax, paired with a reduction in payroll tax, applied at the borders and imports, sounds familiar to you, and you're a communitarian egalitarian, somebody left of center, it might be because it's the same thing that Al Gore has been for about 30 years. I asked him several years ago if I could keep on saying that. He said, hold up, Bob. If you're talking a low, and I said, no, sir, I'm talking a substantial carbon tax that's steadily rising. He said, yeah, fine then. You can tell people what you're for at republican.org is the same thing I've been for about 30 years. Literally the same thing he's been for. And so I happen to know that Art Laffer, one of Reagan's economics advisors, remember the Laffer curve? You know that if you cut taxes on capital, you can get an increased take to the Treasury. JFK proved it, Ronald Reagan proved it. It doesn't necessarily apply in low taxation times, but anyway, he's a neighbor of Al Gore's in Nashville, Tennessee, a literal neighbor. And Art Laffer told me, he went over to Al's house, they talked it through, and they came to the conclusion that a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax works for both of them for very different reasons. And you can see on our website a 2-minute talk with Art and I talking about this. Art says he doesn't know why climate change is real. He says he doesn't need to know. All he needs to know is you're taxing income. He says tax anything else. And so that's why he's for it, the tax swap. And Al, because he seems to know a thing or two about free enterprise innovation. The man's making jack at Apple, you know? I mean, so he seems to believe in free enterprise innovation. And so, yeah, we ultimately want to bring America together, but we got to first let the Hispanic audience hear from the pulpit of this church we're trying to start Spanish, right? I mean, if you start a Hispanic outreach church, you might want to speak Spanish from the pulpit. And so we need to speak hierarchical individualist to right of center people so they can hear it and then say, yeah, we got a solution. Yes, we do. We got a solution. How about you? Remember the chair in middle school across the Spirit Week gym? Yeah. So, yes, sir. Back here, the money guy.
So you're proposing to cut payroll taxes. So how do you propose to fund Social Security then?
Oh, good. So you are in the 90th percentile in knowing that FICA goes to Social Security. So, and that's good. So here's the thing. We can't make Social Security any worse than it already is, right? I mean, we can't hurt it more. That's for sure. We got to do something about it long term. And since I'm a former member of Congress, dead man walking and I've been shot through, I can say these words. You got to either increase the retirement age, you got to cut benefits, or you got to increase taxes. It's probably a combination of all three, and the U.S. Congress is going to do it just before Social Security goes literally broke. But until then, thou shalt not mention the word Social Security without a glowing adjective in front and one behind, okay? That's the political reality of Social Security. But here's the thing. If you do a carbon tax as a source of revenue for the, in replacement of payroll tax for Social Security, you expand the base. Because Bill Gates will be paying, for example, he right now pays payroll tax for like the first 10 minutes of any year or something like that, maybe. Elon Musk maybe for the first 2 minutes of any year. The lady or the man that brought the food, they're paying 365 days a year because they don't get to the max. But Bill Gates and Elon Musk buy stuff, and that stuff will be in essentially a consumption tax that broadens the base of taxation. So it doesn't fix Social Security, but doesn't hurt it. It expands its base a little bit. What else do you want to know? Suggestions, comments, particularly helpful, any advice from you about how to describe this current moment and what we're trying to do about reaching people who are generally right of center or used to think of themselves that way? Yes.
I have no advice.
Okay.
I'm just curious if behind closed doors, people can put the politics aside and agree with you. That won't publicly.
Yeah. We see that in members of Congress. You know, when I go see former colleagues, I guess I'm their former colleague. When I see people in Washington, I can read the thought bubble out of their head. Great to see you, Bob. Fine for you to be here talking to me about this. Can you get to my district? Can you get to my state? That's where I need you. Because they're just afraid of the crowd. And in a way, I'm the worst commercial for this, right? Don't let your shadow fall on me, English. I mean, look what happened to you. But you know, that was a great recession. It's different now. Back then, you know, his aggressive disbelief about climate change was basically, I believe in climate change, you shouldn't either. That's changed. You still find some people that don't want to admit that climate change is real, but that's a declining population. Most people know it's real. The challenge now is getting them to think they've got agency over it. It's too much in the category of death and taxes. Can't do anything about it, so I just got to live with crazy floodwaters from Ohio down to Kentucky this week. I got to live with hot temperatures that are killing people. I got to live with whatever. Death and taxes. So we got to help them to see, no, this, you can actually address it. You can't fix all the damage. It's like, you know, been smoking, no matter how long you've been smoking, the doctors will tell you to stop. If you're 80 years old, they'll tell you to stop. Because, yeah, you may have emphysema, but it's going to be better if you stop now. And so we've been smoking, and we got to stop. And so it's about getting agency, and then, but yes, they are, what it is I do hear from fellow Republicans, some not so out loud, but you can tell they're thinking, if you could just help me on talk radio back home, if you could, and that's what we do. We take the arrows for them back home. I'll give you one example, just how this is sort of a fun story about how this goes. What we do, we operate mostly in Florida, Georgia, Carolinas, Indiana, Utah. We're thinking about Louisiana because Senator Cassidy has the Foreign Pollution Fee Act. It's basically a carbon border adjustment without the domestic price. So I was once, we used to have Washington State on the list because Kathy McMorris Rogers, I served with her, and she was chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and so I was in her district, headed to another district, state we were working on, which is Idaho. And so here's the deal. my schedule guy said, okay, Bob, here's what you do. You check out of this Super 8 in Oregon at 8 in the morning. You sit in the parking lot. You'll still have service there. I said, that's good price because there are bed bugs here in the Super 8, so it's going to be real good to get out into the parking lot. And so I'm out there in the parking lot talking to the talk radio show, and the guy's producer says, well, we'll be with you in 7 minutes. I'm like, I don't have 7 minutes. I got to beat it to Boise to speak to the Rotary Club of Boise, where in Idaho. And so I knew I had no time. So I started up on the interstate, saw the mountains coming, pulled off right underneath the sign that says no parking except for snow chains. Whereupon I'm on the radio and Oregon's Best pulls up, blue lights on. He comes to my window, and so I roll down the window. I put the show on mute because the guy was going on in his question. And so he said, you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm actually on the radio. He said, oh, fine. I just want to make sure you're okay. So he smiles and goes away. And so I rolled up the window, took it off mute, just as the guy put a question mark at the end of his commentary. And so on that show, there are two guys. It's a Christian talk radio show in Catherine McMorris's district. Now, that's a constituency we really need to reach. These two guys flipped on air. They said, we've never heard of this. Why haven't we heard of this? This makes sense. And what they had not heard is they were using some scripture. And so I responded with some scripture. And they were like, oh, you're one of us. Oh, okay, we're talking now. And so then we were communicating. And the two of them flipped on air and said, that's a good idea. We should do that. Why haven't we heard more about this? We need to hear more about this. That's what we live to do, is to be in that situation. After Kathy's trying to help Kathy, she retired, unfortunately. I guess she's lobbying now or something. You look like you're getting ready to give me the hook, and I think I need to go.
No, that's fine. But please join me in thanking Congressman.
Yeah. Thank you.
The website is republican.org, right?
Yes, and please do one of two things. Join us if you generally consider yourself right of center. If you're not left of center, don't join us because we want to be an authentic right of center.